Good morning. My name is David Macadam. I'm the CEO of the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers and Retailers. I'm originally from Canada, on the west coast of Canada in Vancouver. I owned and operated my own business for 25 years in Vancouver, and then in 2004 moved to Dubai and have been resident here since 2004. That's my background. My own business in Vancouver was very successful. I enjoyed all the time, and that was what taught me all my life lessons, was running my own business and trying to make all your own decisions for yourself. So my education qualifications go back into the 70s, late 60s and 70s, where I graduated from the University of Calgary in Alberta, graduated with a science degree, science, math, and then moved to New Zealand, where I studied law in the early 70s at the University of Otago. My main education has always come from taking additional education courses all the way through my life and career. And I think the most important lessons that I've ever learned have always been through doing your own business, running your own teams, and learning about things as you go along. So my family background has been very strong and a very big anchor in my life up until, I guess, into my late teens. I left home relatively early, I guess, depending on your community and where you're from. But in my late teens, I left home and was involved in a lot of recreational pursuits on my own, largely skiing and then also outdoor, like mountain climbing and other things like that. But my family was always the anchor and gave me a strong sense of work ethic, how to achieve things, and to never give up. My father, for instance, ran his own business for many, many years, and I worked alongside him with my brother in that business, and I learned a lot about dealing with people, building relationships, and also just understanding that there's a lot more to life than strictly getting education, but it's a lot more about how to manage relationships with different people. So my first experience in the retail industry was, like many people, when I was a very young boy, I would spend time in the early shopping centers. So this goes back to the late 60s. There were open air shopping centers, and they were in Alberta at the time. So I spent a long time there. I've always had an interest in the retail and the shops and what goes on inside those shops, what sells, what doesn't sell. One of the other things that I've learned early on that I've felt that I had more of an intuition about my future and my career. When I first started into the real estate business and the retail real estate business, I was able to calculate fairly quickly what would constitute a successful retail store. Then I would graduate in my mind to what kinds of rent and payments they could make in terms of their overall gross annual sales. But I was doing this at a very young age, and I really learned that that's how you end up pricing a shopping center, pricing a retail outlet, figuring out what the margins might be. It's one of those callings that I had a great interest in at a very young age, and I really can't say much more than that, except to say that I was always interested in that, and then I developed a very strong passion for it at a fairly young age. So all of my career has been built around this knowledge that I do have an interest in this. I have a passion to understand more, and I enjoy it. I guess you could just say I enjoy it, and I've always enjoyed it. 42 years later, I'm still here. What ignited my passion in retail was really finding shops that were selling products that were very popular at the time. And this goes back to the 60s and early 70s, when retail was a much different place. And I enjoyed very much seeing what was going on with those retail shops and why they were successful. So it's always been an interest. And then later in my career, I found it interesting to understand why certain shops were in certain locations in shopping environments, whether high street or whether they were in the shopping centers, and why they were located beside each other, what these synergistic things meant to these retailers, and why they would have chosen that. That was long before it was a science that it is today, but it was something that I took a great interest in and a passion in as well. Well, I think the most important pivotal change that has struck me, I was in my mid to later 20s, married, I had a family, what happened is that the company that I was with, called Intrawest Properties, had hired me to be their leasing person. I'd gone from marketing into leasing in this company. They had a shopping center that was waterfront in North Vancouver. The issue with it was that it was difficult retail because it was groundbreaking in those days. It was something that people in the industry really hadn't taken. They hadn't really embraced it the way they should have. And I recommended, to keep the leasing momentum going, that we should offer some kind of a leasehold inducement and maybe a variable rate structure that would enable these retailers to get a foothold in the market, to establish their presence, and to be a little bit stronger so that they could afford to pay the kinds of rents that we ultimately needed to make this shopping center viable. So I wrote a long report. When I say long report, it was about 10 to 15 pages long, outlining exactly what I felt needed to happen in this shopping center on the waterfront in North Vancouver. What they came back to me and said, well, we're not going to do that. In fact, we don't think you can do that. And in fact, you're fired. So that was very pivotal for me because a young married man, family, children, mortgage, all of the things that go with it. And then to suddenly be fired for something that I truly believed was the right path going forward, it was very much a shock to me, a shock that was a loss of trust between myself and the owners of that company. So what happened that was very pivotal for me was that the people in this company, in Intrawest, actually gave my report to one of the leading consultants in the retail industry in Vancouver at that time. Her name was Marianne Clark, and Marianne and I are great friends, and were great friends at that time. Anyway, they hired Marianne and her company to basically take over where I had left off the leasing. She convinced them that, in fact, everything that I had written was 100% accurate. In fact, she had even made it a little bit more favorable for the retailers. She went on to earn 10x of what I was earning as an employee of that company. The eye-opening aspect of that for me was, not only was I correct in what I had assumed to be the right way forward, and to take the information that I had learned from listening to the retailers, but also that if I ran my own business going forward, that I had a chance to at least multiply my income. Now, there's a risk attached because there's no steady paycheck. However, if you were successful, and I felt that I certainly could be successful, then everything that I would do going forward would be a direct result of my own success. So I opened my own business. At that time, it was called Pacific Sun Consulting. I ended up starting out with a few small retail developer clients, and that grew very quickly for me so that I was able to be very successful and earn substantially more than I would have had I stayed at Intrawest at the time. Strangely enough, and as fate goes, Intrawest came back to me and they asked if I would like to join them again after they had seen that I was successful on my own. And of course I said, no, thank you, but it was a very kind offer to come back, but I didn't go back. And of course I kept going, and 25 years later, running my own business in Vancouver, it was very successful, but there were a few stressful moments, as you can imagine. You've got a home, a mortgage, a young family, you're married, and it was all very stressful for about, I would say, 2 years. But once I got the business running, up and operational, it was absolutely the right thing to do. It's a lovely story for me. I really enjoyed the whole thing. So it's 2004, and my business, as I was just chatting about for 25 years in Vancouver, it had grown so that my business was really contracting with the pension funds in Vancouver at the time. The pension funds were large, very wealthy owners of property, and they would hire me as a third-party advisor consultant to basically do the leasing or other work that they had on their retail shopping centers, at their office, and in their industrial properties. As the system progressed, my income in my business was such that the pension funds woke up one day and said, well, just a minute, what we're paying Macadam, we could hire 3 or 4 people to do the same job, and then we'd have 3 or 4 people to rely on instead of just David and his team. And so my business was winding down in 2003, 2004. I had some friends that I had done business with over the years. One of them was Steve Sell. Steve Sell and I were friends in Vancouver. He had a business similar to mine in Vancouver, and So Steve had come and had opened actually Dira City Center. So that was in the late 1990s, so 1995, 6, 7 range. And Steve had done very well working with Majid Al Futtaim at the time. Then there was another gentleman that I had done business with through my company in Vancouver in about 1986, 87, Phil MacArthur. And Phil had hired me and my business to actually help them out to do some advisory work on a very, very difficult shopping center that he was running with a company called Westbuild. So that was an interesting way forward as well. Now, fast forward to 2004, I felt that it was time. My wife and I at the time were empty nesters. That means our children had left home, they had graduated university, so there was just my wife and I. And I felt that there was time in my career and in my life. I was early 50s, 52 at the time. And I felt that it was time for us, my wife and I, to spread our wings and maybe explore different parts of the world. I phoned Steve Sell. He got a hold of Phil MacArthur, and Phil said, well, I'll organize a meeting for you with Omar Al Futtaim. You've got to be here at 12 o'clock noon on April the 8th, 2004. If you could be here, Omar has 20 minutes that he set aside. You have to come in. If you sell yourself that you could do the job, then there's a good chance that you can be hired and do some work. So of course I got on the flight, so I was there in time in Dubai, and I arrived and I went into Omar's office. Omar is a very wealthy man, a son of a very wealthy family, billionaire family that owned a lot of the automotive business in Dubai. Omar and I sat down and we built a relationship and a rapport over that 20 minutes. But I was explaining how my business career had also included not only retail, but it also included industrial, also included a lot of work in office and certain elements of retail that was a mixed use. So Omar said, well, you know, why would I hire a guy who's not really a retail guy, but who's a guy who's got a lot of other experience that's not necessarily retail? And I explained to Omar that in fact I was the guy because not only did I have the experience in the retail, but that I would have other experience should you have a requirement for office or residential or for hospitality. So Omar said, okay, I'll give you a chance. You're on 3 months probation. You start, I think at the time it was about August the 4th, I think I began with Omar at Al Futtaim Real Estate Group. I came, I set up. Phil, I was on Phil's team. I reported directly to Phil. I was called the general manager of Al Futtaim at the time of the shopping center part. I worked in the shopping center part. I was successful. Our team, I had I think 67 on the team that I was managing, and it was quite an exciting time for me. And it's certainly a big change from what I've been used to and running a much smaller operation than I was back in Vancouver. So what happened was that I was fortunate enough that the team and I were able to be quite successful in terms of leasing out what they had, starting off with their car showrooms, putting together the leases there. Also with Omar's brand was IKEA at the time, putting together a large IKEA brand, and then working with Phil and others on the team, putting together a lot of the other retail elements that were into Festival City in Dubai. I think the best part about all of that was the fact that not only was I involved in the retail, but Omar and through his team invited me to be part of what was going on in the office. So they were building 500,000 square feet of office at the time. So I hired the office leasing team and directed and ran with them. Also, there was a lot of residential. They had about 350 residential units. So I had 5 staff leasing this residential product at the time. And I had a background from my early days in the real estate business, running from 3 different regions, a series of 13 different residential leasing agents. So that goes back to the early 80s. So running 1 or 2 people or 3, 4 people in the residential, running the office. And then they also have me involved in the hospitality in one way or another. So not only I'd been involved then with, successfully involved, thank goodness, with what was going on in the retail, but also Omar got me involved with the residential and the office and then in the hospitality. So all of the things that I explained to him that I was doing in my past career, he got me going in this career, and that sort of launched me into the region, which I was very, very fortunate about. Now, part of what was very interesting for me was Phil MacArthur at the time, Steve Sell at the time. They were very busy in the industry back in this is in 2004 or 5. They were very much a big supporter of the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers, MECSC, which was an offshoot of the International Council of Shopping Centers, which is from New York. But this was the Middle Eastern version of the ICSC. And so I became, way back when, part of that team of management of, volunteer-wise, management of the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers. And I enjoyed my involvement with rubbing shoulders with the legends at the time, like Steve Sell and others of the Ishwar and others that were part of it. So it was really an enjoyable time for me to really extend and expand my network and what was going on. Virtually every place that I've gone, thankfully, I've ended up to be successful by every measure. And I know I say that, but I know that if anybody looks over my shoulder and sees the performance production, I think they could also agree that it has been very successful. I started off with Better Homes Commercial at the time. And what they wanted me to do at Better Homes was Ryan wanted to really step back from running the business. And they asked me if I wanted to sort of step into the shoes of try to take over running Better Homes Commercial and also the residential component. And when I started, there were about 750 employees. It was 2009 by now. And my mandate at the time was, okay, we're too big. There's a lot of non-producing employees in the company. Whereas instead of we wanting you to grow the business and running it, we now want you to cut it in half or more. So there was over 700 people at the time, and I was able to, with the help of a team, of course, HR and others that were on the team, reduce that to around 200, 250, and closing down 3 or 4 other offices. So that was my mandate. Instead of growing the business, it was cutting it down. That was very stressful, of course, and it's also very heart-wrenching because so many of these people at Better Homes at the time had done really well financially, and suddenly they were commissionable income, and they weren't able to make any money in the commissions because there was really no bids, no ask, no trades in the residential market or in any other kind of market. So Linda Mahoney was very gracious and kind to allow me to be part of that team, and I always remember fondly about all the times, challenging as they were, to do what we needed to do at the time. Next part of my career that I found was very exciting was Jones Lang LaSalle had just acquired another company called RPM. And RPM was run by a couple of gentlemen. One was a Canadian guy. And they asked me if I would come in and start in JLL because JLL had just taken over. And they wanted me to start the retail division of JLL in the region. So that went through the GCC and also into the MENA region, which is Cairo and other communities. So that was a big job. So I started, there was just me, and I grew the team to about 13 over about 3.5 years thereabouts, and grew that into a very profitable business quite quickly. It was one of those situations where we had about $1 million in the pipeline. We had a lot of things going on, but I was flying a lot. So every week I was gone 3 or 4 or 5 days, everywhere between Cairo to Qatar to Kuwait to all through the GCC. And it was quite exhausting for me at the time. I would have been at that time late 50s, early 60s, and I didn't really want to have that kind of a schedule. So the next change for me, I was thinking it was time to do something else, might be a little different, but also a new challenge, because the team at JLL was very successful doing what they were doing. They were gathering lots of new business, but it also meant more hours for me, a lot more work and travel. And when you're running your own business, particularly consultancy advisory, which I was very used to in my early days, the 25 years of Vancouver, it just takes nothing but a lot of hours, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I felt that it was time to pass over the mantle to some younger people, and I'd hired some team at JLL who were very capable to take over. Andrew Williamson and others on the team took over, and they very capably took that business and ran with it. I had a very full pipeline for them when I left. I went to to run the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers and Retailers. Now, that was a very challenging start for me as well. Malachy Kavanagh and Michael Kercheval, who was at that time the president of the ICSC in New York, and I had known these people and I'd had a great relationship with them. And they had said to me, look, we're struggling. We're losing $50,000 a year with the team we have there. Our events aren't making any money. We're losing our traction in the marketplace. We think with the work that you've done building up in the GCC and MENA region, perhaps there's something you can do that would enable us to grow the business and actually make it viable again. So that was 2013 now, and in May of 2013, I took over the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers and Retailers. And that was a very big shock for my system because the team that I inherited, they basically told me that the mission that I had was a mission impossible. They said to me that good luck, we know you're going to fail. And they did pretty much everything they could do to make my life very difficult. So after about 2 months or thereabouts, I decided I had to change the whole team. So I was back to one, myself, and running the entire Middle East Council of Shopping Centers and Retailers. That allowed me to take perspective on a lot of things without the team. I learned all about the finance. I learned about the relationships that were there, weren't there. I learned about where my strengths were personally. It was a time of reckoning for me because my role with ICSC, and they gave me 3 months extendable, every 3 months, every 3 months extendable. So I had to show progress, and I had to show it fairly quickly. And it was very difficult to get rid of your entire team. But I felt that starting with a new, fresh team, I would at least have a new look and an outlook on what was going on in the industry. It worked out, and it was through my relationship with Malachy as well. Malachy was very, very, very helpful for me in making the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers and Retailers a success. How did I do that? Well, the biggest thing that Malachy suggested to me was, he said, I know you don't have the money. I know you don't have the contacts, maybe today, but you will have shortly. He said, you need to write a book. And I'll tell you what, I will backstop you for $80,000 for you to write a new book. And it's up to you. You decide what you're going to write this book about and publish it and then see what happens. But this is it. You got to do it. You got 3 months to figure it out. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's probably not a bad idea. So I went to Motivate Publishing at the time. Maurice, who's still with us now, bless her heart, it's been over 10 years, 11 years that we've worked together. And Maurice and I went to Motivate Publishing, and we chatted with the team there to put together a book. It was the first of the 3 books that now we've been involved with. But this was called Souks To Malls, Retail Evolution in the Gulf. And it was all about the evolution of retail from the 1860s in Mecca through until 2014, which was the date that we wanted to publish this book. So I reached out to all of the old members and other retailers and other shopping center owners that I had met through my connections with JLL, and with other people that I had known through my networking. So the one thing that I learned is you can never put a value on the absolute true meaning of the word trust and value of relationships. Because when I reached out to all of my friends and colleagues in the industry to write this book, I was overwhelmed with their generosity of time and them sending pictures of the historical shopping centers way back in Mecca, as I said, from the 1860s through until 2014. So the issue for me at that point was my budget was $80,000, and we wanted to try and limit the book to around 180 pages, 90 in Arabic and 90 in English, with all of these photographs. And it was a big challenge for us to keep the lid on the budget and also to incorporate everybody's part in the book. The success came with this book because everyone at the end of the day, and Malachy was so right in his advice, he said, at the end of the day, David, whether the book's good or bad, they're going to say, well, you know what, I want to see a copy of this book because we sent you all this information. We talked to you about how it was going to work. Did you really deliver on the promise you made with us? And I said, well, the only thing I could do is a proof was in this book. So I sent the book back and out. We ordered 2,500 copies. And at the first in 2014 at our Recon event, I was able to pass out this book, which it turned out to be a true success. It was difficult in those days to get all the permits we needed to print it in Dubai at the time, but Motivate Publishing were very supportive of us. They gave us all of the permits that we needed, and they were very helpful with their team. They knew how to put a coffee table book together. They'd done a lot of work for His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum with his books, so I knew that we were in good hands with them to create a masterpiece of a book. And thankfully, it worked out well. My colleagues and friends were very supportive after they saw the quality of the book, the coffee table book. We gave away 2,500 copies, and I was very, very pleased and gratified with the acceptance of this book. The one thing that Maliki said to me was, he said, David, there's only one thing I'm going to give you as advice. He said, make sure you don't print any more books than you believe you can get rid of in 1 year. And he said, one of the guys at ICSC thought that they had a masterpiece of a book. They ordered 50,000 copies. And he said, in our warehouse, we have 49,500 of these copies sitting in the warehouse. So I said, well, I don't want to have that happen. But it was great advice. So the 2,500 copies, at the end of the day, we had, I think, down to 500 copies left. And we reached out, and I took a lot of those books with me on the different road shows that I went on. And they were very helpful for me to be sort of a pass. It was my way to get into these other events, passing out some of these books. It was like my, at the time, it was like my business card, except it was a book, a coffee table book that was well received. So that was a good part for me. I think the other thing that happened, and I'm talking a lot here, but I think one of the other things that was pivotal for me that made the Middle East Council of Shopping Centers and Retailers the success that it has become was a good friend, Muhammad Alawi. I reached out to him and said, I think we need to have a magazine for our organization. I said, what I learned about with this book, Souks To Malls, Retail Evolution in the Gulf, was that people love to see pictures of themselves in the industry doing what they do every day. And he said, yes, you're right, it's a perfect idea. And I said, but the only problem that I have is I have no money to bootstrap the start of the publication of this magazine. So Maurice and I and others at this time now had started, and what we began to do was create this first magazine called the Retail People magazine. So at the time in North America, there was a magazine out that was very popular it was just called People magazine. So all I did was I decided I would just call it Retail People magazine and made it all about the retail people. So through the generosity and the true genuine support of Muhammad Alawi, we were able to bootstrap the launch of this magazine. And now this magazine is still in business over 10, 11 years later. Most magazines, when it came to pandemic, shut down because they didn't have the wherewithal to keep the publishing going. But with our magazine, we kept it alive. Maurice and her team that we were working on it, she was able to make sure that the Retail People magazine was relevant. We were able to create enough of an income source from it that it still stays viable today. And we publish quarterly, and it's still one of our great ways to reach out to everybody there. That's it. I need to have a drink of water.